Welcome to the G360 Wealth Podcast. Today, we're super excited to be joined by one of my favorite people in the world, Frank Paolini. Frank is a partner of the private wealth group of Neil Gerber and Eisenberg. Frank is a tremendously talented attorney, more importantly, an even better guy and advisor and partner to wealthy families across the country. Frank has a plethora of expertise, often known as the fix-it guy. But specifically in this conversation, we're going to be talking about one of the greatest gifts to give, which is a gift to give. So we're going to be talking about advanced charitable giving strategies. So we're going to be covering all sorts of acronyms and income tax deductions and estate tax credits. But without further ado, welcome, Frank. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate you having me on.
Frank, so as I alluded to in my intro, over the years, I've gotten to know you by way of introduction of finding things in new client estate plans that seemed quite impossible to fix. And apparently everybody told me you're the fix-it guy. How did you become the fix-it guy? And how did you get to where you're at in working with a really high-profile client base, wealthy families, family offices, and build your expertise in such complicated structures, and more importantly, sometimes decluttering unnecessarily complicated structures that we found over the years?
Yeah. Well, it's a bit of a long story, but to kind of give you the short Cliff Notes version, I originally started my practice in Detroit, and I was working in the estate planning world at that time. I actually started in trust estate litigation, and early on in my career, I realized that I wanted to elevate the type of practice that I had. I wanted to work on more complex matters, more tax-related matters, more like the things I work on today. And there wasn't as many opportunities in Detroit at that time to really do that. And by some fortunate accident, I was contacted by my prior law firm, which was Dentons, which is a global law firm, very large. And I was informed that essentially the head of the group and the head of the firm at one point was looking for a successor, somebody to help take over the role that he played in these families. His name was Don Lubin. He was one of the best humans I've ever met, let alone attorneys. And they made an offer of a lifetime, basically, and said, "We need you to help usher in the end of his practice this way and ingratiate yourself with these families and work on the next generations." And I said, what's the catch? And they said, "Well, we need you now in 3 weeks." And I said, you got it. And so I told my wife we're moving to Chicago, and we packed our 2-year-old up and came down. And I shared a wall with Don for many years. And Don's claim to fame was he was Ray Kroc's first attorney. And Ray Kroc is the founder of McDonald's. And Don sat on the board for many decades of McDonald's and built an incredibly successful career working with families that are just of enormous wealth. And I was dropped into the deep end immediately, day one. And so you asked, how do I get to the point where I'm a fixer? Well, I was underqualified to get that job and had to work really hard to figure out how to educate myself in this space to even address some of the problems that we were dealing with, which are things that by their very nature are not easy to come by, and there's not a lot of materials out there. So it's a little bit of the Wild West, but I loved it. And I gravitated towards the stickier problems. And I also wanted to build a practice early. I didn't want to wait for that. I really enjoyed the client engagements. And to this day, that is my favorite part of the job. And so when you're a young lawyer in a city like Chicago and you want to build your business, you don't get the pick of the litter of the matters. Usually I was getting matters that were passed up by my, older colleagues and peers saying, "Oh, this is a little too messy for me." And I was eager to take the business on. And so over the years, I have a lot of stories and a lot of really, really interesting, wild cases solely because I was open to them. And so over time, I've been able to develop, for good or for bad, that reputation where if you have something really odd, chances are Frank can help one way or another.
So it was your inability to say no and the hunger to get in front of the client facing experience. And I remember that myself too. When I was
Hmm.
in my prior firm, I just wanted to work with clients. I wanted to work with people and have a team
Hmm.
around us to help with the administrative piece and build connections, right? Because over these, we're not just dealing with papers when we do this. We're dealing with real client families and multiple generations. And I think a lot of times this process gets lost into becoming an academic process,
Hmm.
right? And we forget that there's real people behind these papers. And I think that's what you do so well is resonate and connect with your clients. Before we
That,
get oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead. No, it's fine.
Before we get into the charitable giving piece, which we want to highlight the conversation, tell us about your firm. How did you get from Denton's to Neil Gerber and Eisenberg? And what does your firm do? I mean, it seems like you guys have all the levers in the Swiss Army knife to do anything a client would need.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, when Don retired early on in the pandemic, and that left me as the sole full-time partner in the Chicago group. We had some part-time partners, but I was the only full-time at that point. And I realized that my families that I worked with and Don's families that we worked with didn't really appreciate or want an enormous law firm to represent them. These families want a personal touch, and that's what they expect from their advisors, their bankers. And I realized that the writing was on the wall that business structure of a very large law firm might work well for a Fortune 100 company or for a private equity firm, but it's not ideal for private client work. So when Don retired, I realized my practice was growing quickly. I needed to plug into a new place that had younger talent that I could really get them ingratiated into my families. And so it was time to move on. And I talked to him about that, and he understood and gave me his realistically his blessing at that point. And so I searched through firms, and um I came across Neil Gerber, and it checked every box for me. The firm is, although in some regions would be considered big. I think we have about 130 or 135 attorneys. In Chicago, that's relatively small. But what was unique about Neil Gerber is that it's the only one of the only firms that I'm aware of that is private client forward. It was established by my partner Marshall Eisenberg, who's still practicing today, and he established it in 1986 for the express purpose of catering to a multi-billion-dollar family that he still represents to this day. And so he basically took a private client or family office and built an entire law firm around it. So all the practice groups that are a part of our firm, the corporate, the M&A, the real estate, the litigation, are all designed to cater to a private client. And to this day, we're still one of the front leading practice groups in the firm, which is just a rare circumstance. Normally in the private wealth space and law firms, trust and estate attorneys or practice groups are more or less a tack on practice group to corporate or M&A groups. And instead here we're very focused. Even the managing partner here, Bobby Gerber, who's technically in our corporate group, knows more about estate planning than many of the estate planners that I know. It's really great. And on top of it, they had done a very good job of building a younger corral of people, which is it's just very difficult to find really good talent in this space. And so when I saw that, and I went, I was going from a firm of something like 20,000 attorneys globally to a place where there's 130 attorneys, and I could walk down the hall and talk to my CFO or CEO. It was a game changer, and my clients noticed immediately. Um, but it was one of those scary leaps of faith because you don't know necessarily what's going to happen if you leave the firm, and I didn't know where that was going to land. The fortunate part was I made the move, and every single client of mine came along, which was gave me a real good boost in my sales. It was fantastic. And so then I was able to hit the ground running. And what I've been trying to do at Neil Gerber over these past few years is really continue to build out that next generation of planners here. Like I said, there's a dearth of talent in this space, and we are now operating. We're very unique. I hired two young associates last year. We just recruited a young partner from a competitor a couple months ago, and we're still in the buying business. And what really makes us different is this small touch. So this is a firm where it's small, but it's mighty. These are the most talented attorneys I've ever worked with in my life. So I feel lucky to do it and excited for this opportunity to keep building out.
Yeah, and it seems, this private wealth space, right? Because it used to be the trust and estates group everywhere. Now it's private wealth services.
Hmm.
And it seems that by being mighty, right? I'm sure you work with a lot of business owners or corporate executives, right? So not only do you have the capabilities to set up, a charitable entity or an estate plan, you can go from a basic revocable trust for a second generation or third generation client to IPOing a company or patents, right? NGE has all the resources to serve all the needs of a private client family. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, virtually all of them, even all the way down to, you hope you don't have to, but white collar criminal defense. We have experts in that space as well. Um, I'm a tax lawyer by trade, but I operate essentially like an outside general counsel for ultra high net worth families and family offices. And so my core team handles the tax planning, as you mentioned. We're doing discounted sales to defective trusts and slats and cruts and clats and all the, acronyms and things like that. And my core drafting team works on that day to day. But my clients look to me for all of their legal problems normally. And so whatever their issue is, I need to be ready to handle it. So, again, when I was looking for law firms, I couldn't really land at a firm that was just a niche firm that was just for trust and estates work, because I need practitioners in all different practice areas to cater to my clients. So I have clients selling businesses, buying businesses, in litigation, in real estate. So I need to call upon all those. So I did need to find a place that was, in the Goldilocks zone, which is large enough to have enough really good practitioners, but not so large that it was unattractive to the clients. And that's exactly what we have now.
Yeah, I think it ends up working great for the client, right? Because wealthy family, they don't want to have six different law firms. They
That's
want
right.
one person. I think you pinned that best as an outside general counsel to kind of block and tackle everything, whether it's patents, real estate, trust and estates, M&A, all that stuff. And it just delivers a wonderful client experience with a single point of contact who can operate as that outside GC for the family.
Yeah, the way I describe it to, potential clients or advisors who I'm trying to describe what I do is an anecdote or an example. One family I worked at Denton's in 1 week. We worked on the IPO for their company they founded, and at the end of that week, I had to fly to Florida to bail their grandson out of jail. And so we were a one-stop shop for that family.
Literally everything.
That's right.
hopefully that was the last time for him.
It was, fortunately, knock on wood.
so so along the way, a lot of the families that we represent, one thing that's important to them is giving back, right? They've worked hard their whole life, they've received many blessings financially, they want to give back and they want to make an impact. In a prior episode we talked with Fidelity about donor advised funds,
Hmm.
but there are more advanced charitable giving strategies, especially for clients that are facing big income tax burdens, whether it's exercising stock sales or ISOs or non-quals, or have a big estate tax liability.
Hmm.
But before we get into the technicals, one thing that I think is really great about you, Frank, is your why, right? You had a pretty great blessing in your life. I'd love for you to tell our listeners about, why charitable giving is important to you.
Yeah, well, I am the beneficiary of philanthropy, and I tell my clients that I'm from a very different world than all of my clients that I work with today. I grew up in Detroit, and I'm the oldest of seven kids. My father became permanently disabled when we were younger, and that caused us to essentially, more or less lose everything, all financial support. It really shaped my life and my siblings' life, even to this day. But when I was young, and I was coming out of middle school, um, I was, set to go to the local public school in my neighborhood, and I got a call, a random call from the dean of a very prestigious and more importantly expensive high school in the area, Detroit Catholic Central, and very well known for academics and athletics. It's a tremendous school. And he asked me, "How would you like to go to Catholic Central?" And I kind of chuckled, said, "Sure, yeah, I would love to," knowing that there was no way that my family could afford to pay for me, let alone my other siblings, to go there. And he informed me that somebody had offered to, anonymously pay for my tuition if I were interested in going there. And I never met that person. I don't know who it is. But they did that for me, and they did that for one of my brothers as well. And that was one of the largest, most impactful things that ever happened to me in my life. Because one thing that I realize in talking with my clients, especially my clients who have are seasoned in this space, they have been in this position for a long time, they don't have the knowledge that the environment and the ability to expose a young person in particular to a completely different environment can have an immense impact. Um, so what this opportunity gave me was to go from a world where I did not know any wealthy people. My parents didn't know any wealthy people. We had no idea what the professional world was like. I was never exposed to anything like that. Um, and my father was a blue collar worker, and everybody in my family and everybody around us were that. And I was able to, when going to CC, be able to be exposed to a completely different world, a different mindset, a different environment. The curtain was pulled open, and I was able to see opportunities that I never knew existed before. And so when I'm talking to clients about philanthropy, I will use that experience, in order to help them understand how to how to address philanthropy in a way that really speaks to them, because everybody wants that impact. And I can give them that firsthand experience as to what that could look like.
Yeah, it's just an amazing story, and you capitalize on that opportunity. What I think is so cool about that is through the education you're able to receive and elevate yourself to where you are now, I would assume you've helped client families across the country give billions. I'm sure you hit that number with helping use your knowledge to help them give more effectively. So you've amplified that gift
Hmm.
and impacted so many people along the way. I just think it's a really spectacular story. And I think a lot of times, when we think about charitable giving, we think it's just such big picture, right?
Hmm.
Like, how do I set this up and then where do I want to give? But there are end people on the end of these grants and gifts. And I think it's just so truly inspirational about the impact that you can make and how those beneficiaries can make a further impact along the way and make society and your community a better place.
That's exactly right, because many of these strategies can check multiple boxes for the family. One is obviously giving back. Two is tax savings are nice, and of course they're interested in that. But also for families that are concerned, most of my families are very concerned about the negative impacts that wealth could have on intergeneration, or on the next generations. And we have many conversations about how do you instill a sense of, what we call fire in the belly. How do you motivate children who don't necessarily need or have financial needs, and things like that driving them. And a thing like a private foundation can be a great opportunity for that, because it gives them something to focus on for the greater good. They can focus on on keeping and maintaining the family's legacy. And it can expose those kids, just like I was exposed to this world. It can expose them in the opposite way, where maybe they live a life where they were sheltered and went to great schools and lived in very nice neighborhoods. And what the private foundation gives them the opportunity to do is they have to work to figure out how to deploy this money in an effective way. And they're going to then see the people in need, and they're going to be exposed to that. And it's almost always a positive impact for those that get involved.
Yeah, so jumping in right into the private family foundation, which I think is a great place to start.
Hmm.
I would say for 95+% of people, the donor advised fund is going to check off all the boxes because you can set it up in 15 minutes,
That's
easy
right.
to fund, easy to give. But it has some limitations, right? Both sets of entities have their pros and cons, which I'd love to
Hmm.
dive into. When do you start thinking a private family foundation is going to make sense? Is it a dollar amount? Is it the type of family? Is it their goals? Is it a combination of all of those? When do you start saying, okay, this client's going to be a good candidate for a family foundation?
It's it's for it's for those families eh, that have a very clear picture of what they want to achieve from a philanthropic position, right? So the when we talk about an interest in philanthropy, there's a spectrum that our clients fall on. And many people, what they do is they want to do good with their money, and they also want to do something to mitigate the tax implications to their family, but they don't know where to start, or they don't have a firm idea of how to build something out. And for some of my clients, one of my wealthiest clients that just passed away late last year, he was philanthropically minded, but he did all the things he wanted to do. But he has an enormous estate, and his family was taken care of, and he just didn't know where to start. And he was quite ill, and didn't have really the ability, the energy to be able to build something out. And so I presented him with a specific strategy, and I told him that, look, at we can all you really need to do is point in a direction, right? And he was, for instance, very educationally focused. And so I said, we can build this whole thing out for you, and you get all the benefit that you want to be able to get, without having to worry about building this thing out in particular. So that was a relatively unique case. But what the people who really want or need a foundation are the ones who have a very specific charitable focus in mind. They want to resolve or attack a specific problem, and they want to do so in an active way, right? So foundations can be structured in many different ways. Some of them are just grant making institutions, which is the baseline type of a foundation. And that's just an institution that just pays out grants that are consistent with its charitable purpose, and really doesn't do or offer more than what a DAF would do, as you mentioned, right? And if for those clients who want to do well, and want to have the opportunity to spread wealth around, and but don't really have a clear picture of what it is, the DAF is probably a better fit for them than the private foundation. However, you and I share a client who has very specific and definitive charitable goals in mind, and wants to actively pursue them and create a vehicle to do that. That's the type of a client, I think, that meets the needs, or foundation really fits their bill. And the amount of work that goes into building these foundations and maintaining them is warranted in that scenario, because you get to create the structure the way the client exactly wants it to look like.
God, so walk me through what a private foundation is going to consist of to actually get across the finish line, right? So
Hmm.
client comes to us, they want to set up a DAF, boom, boom, boom. We send them an application, their DAF's open, they're ready to go. A little more work to put in the private family foundation, right? Now we're filling out forms for the IRS, we're doing an
Hmm.
intake, we're establishing their goals. Walk us through what that process looks like, and kind of the timeline to set that up.
Yeah, yeah, it's not a small undertaking. In order to establish a foundation, you have to create an entity of some sort. It can be established by either a charitable trust or a corporate entity. So you have, if it's a corporate entity, now you have the regular corporate governance structure you have to put together. You're going to need at least, 3 directors, let's say, or officers, depending on the jurisdiction. And then you need to have all of the formation items that you need to establish any corporation. On top of that, you have to achieve tax exempt status, both at the federal level and at the state level. At the federal level, you have to submit a Form 1023, it's called, which is not a small form. It has many, many questions, and it feels like every year it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And what it really is an application to the IRS, and essentially an interview with the IRS to have them deduce whether you legitimately meet the standards for a tax exempt entity. So it requires the client to build out essentially a charter for it. What is the purpose? What is it trying to achieve? How is it planning to achieve it? I call those the softer issues. Those are ones that you have to put a lot of creative thought into, because you're really it's essentially building a business plan, but for philanthropy that's going to be viewed by the IRS. And so you have to build it like you would build up any kind of business plan or a resume or something like that. Then you have all the technical issues that come with it. How is it going to be financed? What is it going to receive? Is it going to solicit grant or solicit donations? Is it going to operate like a public charity, which is a little different than the ordinary private foundation? There's many, many, many technical questions that you have to work your way through, and it's not a small undertaking. And generally, even when you do all that work, you then have to submit the 1023, and if you're lucky, it gets approved by the IRS in about 6 months or so. And if it doesn't, it'll come back. If there are defects that they have identified, then hopefully you can rectify them and get back on file. But it is not is nowhere near as easy as establishing a DAF, which you can do virtually overnight. And then you can just assume that whatever state you're in, there are other hoops that you would need to jump through from administrative purpose in order to get that status at the state level as well.
Yeah, and you definitely need your team working together. You need your financial advisor, you need Frank, you need your CPA, you need everybody working together, because there's going to be a lot of moving pieces.
That's right.
Let's kind of get through the other heavy lifting too, right? Versus a DAF, right? There are going to be some taxes that flow through, right? There could be some. You got to be careful, right? At a prior firm, understood that we had a client that come to us because they had a lot of UBTI tax that came through. You got to be careful of that. There's some excise tax that you got to be mindful of.
Yep.
And then the big difference is you have to distribute 5% of the assets per year. Where in a DAF, you can just, as of right now, just keep them in there forever and let them keep growing tax free. So those are some of the other, I wouldn't say issues, but considerations when you're establishing a private family foundation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there are many, many nuanced issues that come with managing these foundations that require professionals to work. Even in scenarios like that client I mentioned, where I gave him this charitable structure. I'm at the helm of it. I still have teams of advisors working with me on this day to day, because of the amount of work that it takes to maintain this, and the amount of things you have to keep an eye on. The distribution is a big issue. The mandatory 5% distribution can be an issue. There are mechanisms and ways of trying to mitigate that impact. But realistically, we tell our clients you have to assume that it's going to be a 5% draw that needs to go out every year. So again, for that client who wants to be philanthropically focused but doesn't have that specific motivation, right? That 5% issue could be a problem for that family. And so we go through these checklist of items with clients when we're trying to gauge what we think is the best tool for them in looking at this space.
Yeah, so let's talk about the exciting parts about a private family foundation, right? Now you could, while the donor advised funds have evolved, you really can't invest them like you could a private family foundation. You can put all sorts of assets, right? You can put private equity, private credit, structured notes, real estate, whatever you want in there, right? There's all sorts of considerations that we want to make sure, as I had mentioned, in a prior firm, we had a client that just invested with his buddy in his PE fund, but didn't realize that there was a big, UBTI kick through, which was an unpleasant surprise when he signed up for a 10-year drawdown fund. So he's getting that every year for the next decade.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the advantages are, right, you could potentially employ your family members, have them work together,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can get more, what I like to call get your hands in the dirt, right? You're not just grant making in some cases. You can actually have events or interface directly with the end benefactor.
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that a family should consider, when they're in that decision mode of a DAF versus a private family foundation? What's on the other end of when somebody says, "Hey, I want this," alarm bells start going off with Frank saying, "Okay, you're a great candidate for a family foundation."
It's for the families that are already engaged in big philanthropic efforts. I work with many families, some of which they look at they look at their position on a karmic level, let's just say it that way, where I was just actually talking to one of my best clients last night, and she just turned 90, and she was reflecting on her life, and the way she described it to me really resonated. And what it was she said, you know it took a lot of work. She and her husband established all the wealth, and he passed away a few years ago. And she said it took an incredible amount of work, but it was an incredible amount of luck that got us to this point as well too. The universe has decided, whoever it is and whatever it is, has decided to give us this fortune one way or the other. And now I feel so fortunate that I feel a responsibility to put back into the system, because if we want to work in a world where, or live in a world where fortunate events can happen like this to people, you need to participate in that as well to make that work. And so she was in a position where we, over many years, have been developing tax planning strategies for the G2, the next generation. And that family, that generation level is significantly more wealthy than even G1 is. They're already taking care of their kids. Her grandchildren in their 30s are going to be well taken care of. So she has gone through what I have, this imaginary priority list in my mind of planning. When somebody comes to me and hasn't done anything, I go through that many times on a generational level. And I'll say, what have we done for this next generation? What have we done for the third and beyond? Once you get to that point where you have sufficiently saturated that generational list, and I have clients that we get to a point where they say, the plans were so successful. They said, if we knew it was going to be even this successful, we're not sure we would have set them all up right. So now,
Yep.
this client is in this position where she feels like she needs to pay everything back, and she has been involved in philanthropy their entire life. They had a family foundation since the 60s established, and each of their kids were always raised with that understanding and the appreciation of how fortunate they are and the responsibility that comes with it. And it's also a family that is very well knit. It's probably the most functional family I work with. Everybody likes each other. Everybody works with each other. I represent every single person in that family, and don't have a single issue across the board. So that family is a perfect candidate for a foundation, because she wants to create a structure where the grandchildren and future generations can look at it as their job. My job is to sit on the board for the foundation and figure out how to utilize this in the way that grandma and grandpa wanted this to work, right? And how do we fulfill grandma's goal, which is to pay the universe back for all these great things that we have. And so when I describe that kind of family, that's the kind of poster child that you really want. And they also have very firm philanthropic goals of medical research and education. Those are the two big things. And how we help establish that for the next generations. You want to create a roadmap for them, or precedent for the next members of the family when they're running it. And so we are actively working on present day philanthropy, and just made a $10 million gift to a children's hospital, focus on particular research that my client was interested in. And we've done many of those, and we'll continue to do more of those over time. And what's great about those is that it gives the next generation something to look at and something as an example when they're considering new opportunities for the foundation, when they're in that driver's seat and they have to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? Where are we going to deploy this money? They have a history to look to, and this is what grandma and grandpa used to do. They did this and they did that, and they gave here and they did this and they did this pledge, and it's a great way to motivate the next generation because it gives them an instruction manual essentially.
Yeah, and I think internally it allows the family to come together, right? When you're looking at an investment portfolio for your personal portfolio and you're at a significant level of wealth, right? Sometimes there's so much abundance. It's like, okay, am I up 12? Am I up 15? Like it's all cherries here.
Mm-hmm.
But in a private family foundation, there's real impact, right? 1 or 2% by being able to open up that universe, right? To private investments, private equity,
Mm-hmm.
some private stock, things like that allow you to capitalize on a huge level of appreciation, all tax free, which will go to your favorite beneficiaries, which I think is just so powerful because now we're making a real tangible impact. They're just not numbers on a performance report anymore.
That's exactly right. The real life.
So let's get into the acronyms, right?
Yeah.
We got CLUTs and CRATs and units and annuities.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe let's start at a high level. What is a CRAT? What is a CLAT or a CLUT? Why an A or a U? I'll let you take it away.
Sure,
All the
sure.
calculations and all the fun stuff that you've got the spreadsheets for.
Yeah, I'll try not to put everybody who's watching this to sleep on this, so as much as I can. So the way to think about the charitable trust structures is there's the question is, do you want to make an immediate charitable impact, or do you want one to happen down the road? And I can give an example as to why that would happen. So when you have a CRUT or a CRAT, that's a charitable remainder annuity trust or a charitable remainder unitrust. Those will allow an individual to contribute, let's say, highly appreciated securities into a trust vehicle that will create a payment stream to a certain beneficiary, maybe in their family, right? So maybe this is good for the client who has a very heavily appreciated stock portfolio that they don't need to tap into for the rest of their life. But they have, let's say, needs that need to be met for the next generation or planning objectives that they want for the next generation. And then they ultimately want to have a charitable impact. So what you would do then is you would place these securities into this CRUT or CLAT and designate who the beneficiaries are. And depending on which structure you choose, a certain amount of money every single year will be distributed to that individual for a term period. Let's say usually it's 20 years, right? So, or that's most common. And if it's a CRUT, it's just a percentage of the overall value, kind of like a private foundation is do 5%. It's a percentage, and it's based on some IRS tables. So we would have to figure out what it is at the time that you want to create it. The other one is an annuity, also fixed by percentage by the IRS, but it fixes the dollar amount. So if you have somebody who wants more certainty, they would say, I want to make sure a certain dollar amount goes to this individual every year for this term period, the annuity is the best option. And what it means is that at the end of that term period, when those payments are done, whatever is left over in that trust goes to charity. The benefit you get on day one is you get the charitable deduction for contributing those assets to that trust. It's not necessarily a one for one because obviously some of the funds are going to be going to an individual, but you still have that immediate charitable impact. You get to perhaps avoid a big income tax realization by the fact that you can liquidate those assets inside that trust vehicle without incurring those taxable gains. So you can check a lot of boxes that way. Um, the other set of structures does the exact opposite, but it operates the same way. So those are charitable lead trusts. Those are trusts that provide immediate distributions or grants to charitable and philanthropic vehicles, and then a remainder interest, whatever is left over, goes to whomever you designate in that trust. And they have differences in the way that they're run, but they're designed to deal with different interests and clients of different interests. And the way I address this issue is clients many times will do research ahead of time, and they'll say, I think I need a CLAT or a CRUT or whatever it would be. I'll say, before we get to all the acronyms and talking about it, why don't you tell me, what are you trying to achieve, right? And then tell me about your family, and I can then identify which one of these structures best fits your particular scenario. Um, if you like, I can give you an example of
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
do.
Maybe
Yeah.
let's walk through like a corporate executive with super high income, and maybe his amazing financial advisor got him SpaceX stock 10
Hmm.
years ago.
Hmm.
It's, got it for a bag of marbles. Now he's got $100 million
That's
in
right.
unrealized capital gain. And he also has a huge ordinary income,
Yes.
or
Yes.
he or she.
Hmm. I have that. I had that exact scenario many times. So I had a client who ran a Fortune 100 company, and over the years, he would receive equity grants, right? And those amassed to a huge amount of shares in this company with a almost zero cost basis, right? So they were producing an incredible amount of ordinary income, and he wasn't terribly motivated to liquidate them during his lifetime, because he knew that if he passed away and was able to leave that for the next generation, he would receive some sort of he would step up in basis. And so we had this island of equity, sitting here for many decades, and figuring out how to deal with it. Well, while it was sitting there for those decades, we were also doing tax planning for him and his family, and had some very successful transactions involving grats and things like discounted sales. And so what had happened was, by the time we got to um, the end of his life, which was last year, we went back and we reflected on all the success that he had in tax planning, and we realized that the immediate generation behind him was more than provided for. In fact, he did not want to give any more, because he thought it would have a negative impact giving more. And realistically, it's enough for many, many generations, but he said it's absolutely more than enough for that generation. He was also very motivated to not pay the estate tax, especially in Illinois. You can get a combined tax of close to 50% at some points, and it takes in a huge bite out of the estate. And he was philanthropically minded during his lifetime, and he gave a lot during his lifetime. But again, he didn't have a full-fledged plan in mind. So what we ended up proposing, and he really appreciated it, was what's called a TCLAT. So it's a testamentary charitable lead trust. And it's a trust that creates that charitable lead, like you and I were just talking about, but only on your passing. And what it gives you in benefit is, it actually provides a much larger dollar for dollar benefit when you're looking at the estate tax regime as opposed to the income tax regime. And so in other words, his estate had about $150 million that was going into this TCLAT. And the benefit it provided his estate is that his estate gets a 100% estate tax deduction for any amounts that go into that CLAT. And so what it does is the funds go into that CLAT when you pass away. This one is an annuity, so it pays an annuity to his private foundation that we established for him. And at the end of that term period, and his was 20 years, whatever's left over goes to generations 3 and beyond. So now he understands that he's provided for, G2. He doesn't need to give any more money. Nobody needs to receive anything when he passes immediately. And so we were able to check many boxes at once. We got to save tens of millions of dollars in taxes. His family is now able to basically, use a fire hose of cash for philanthropy for the next 20 years. It's going to do tremendous good all around. And then in 20 years, his great grandkids or his grandkids and great grandkids are going to get an enormous nest egg. And by our estimates and our calculations, it'll probably be pretty close to 100% of the dollars that went in day one. So if 150 went in day one, by the end of that term period, another 150 will have come out. And it has the income tax benefits along that whole period of time, because when the annuity is paid out of the CLAT, it essentially washes all of the taxable income out of that trust and pushes it to the foundation. So the trust many times doesn't have any income taxes. The TCLAT wouldn't have income tax obligations at that time. So it really, for the client that doesn't need to necessarily worry about that next generation, who is philanthropically minded and does want to create a dynasty, that I think is one of the most elegant and perfect vehicles for that.
Yeah, and you beat me to what I was going to ask, right? So these vehicles can dovetail, right? Like a CLAT in a private family foundation or a DAF,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you can use these tax planning strategies that all work together and holistically. And I think you brought up such an elegant point about the estate tax being far more penal than income tax in certain situations,
Mm-hmm.
because now with the rise of tax-aware investment planning, and a lot of these clients have real estate depreciation or depreciation from private investments. Their income tax burden, while their portfolios might be large, they might not have a huge income tax burden. And that estate tax burden, especially states like Massachusetts, Illinois, like those can get very, very penal. So it
Mm-hmm.
allows them to provide a great charitable bequest, hit other generations, and have everybody working together, right? And have a team behind them to align on their goals. I think that's maybe the final point that I wanted to bring up is, we always say here that best advisors coordinate and illustrate. Frank, you check those boxes because you're great at coordinating and executing, right? A lot of times these plans get so complicated, their
Yeah.
key advisors struggle to get them across the finish line, which I think you do so well of not only coordinating it, but you use software to illustrate that. Most of our clients are very visual, so
Mm-hmm.
they can see how this all works together. And I think it's so helpful when you take these things out of the vacuum that they're in and put it in their broader plan. Like, what do their cash flows look like? What do their objectives look like? And it takes some time to really thoughtfully think about these entity formations and executions, because these are permanent decisions,
Yeah.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
we want to make sure that we have the right people involved, the right advisors involved, a great continuity plan. And I think you do such a great job of bringing that all together for clients, because they have these arrows. And a lot of times what happens, I think, with us is, you know, client has dinner with their friends, and their friends say, well, we just set up a crat, we want a crat.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
you may not need one.
Mm-hmm.
So you can take this up the complexity curve all the way from a qualified charitable distribution or a donor advised fund to pairing a CLAT, a CRUT, and a private family foundation and putting them all together. It just really depends on each client situation, and that's why I think this job is so fun, because we get to work together with adding a great CPA, great advisors, and allow clients to achieve their individual goals. And that's why, every client is different. They have different goals and objectives, and that's why all their plans look different. So to our listeners out there, don't copy and paste your best friend's plan. It might not fit for you.
Mm-hmm.
And along the way, there's going to be so many different unique factors. Are you funding it with appreciated stock? Are you using life insurance? Is it a business interest? There's a lot of complication. Do we need to get, a fourth advisor? Do we need to get a valuation? Everything just really needs to work together holistically. And
Yeah.
then the plan needs to be monitored and updated. So I think, what I'd like to give you your flowers on is working together with advisory teams and tax teams, ultimately for the benefit of the client. And I think your firm does just such an excellent job of delivering that world-class experience that our mutual clients have come to know.
Oh, I really appreciate that, and I am very sensitive to that. Many other estate planners and a lot of my predecessors, I felt like, got paid by the pounds of paper they produced, right? And as opposed to coming up with a good strategy. And a lot of the work that I have to do, and a lot of the ways I cut my teeth as a young lawyer, was figuring out how to simplify these uberly complex strategies that were created by very talented and very smart attorneys who didn't take into account the practical impact of all of these things. And so a lot of the work, 50% of my practice is actually administering these vehicles or family offices. And so simplicity runs in my favor as much as it does the clients, because if I'm going to have to implement this, I want to make this as smooth as possible for me and my team. And so practicality of a particular plan is a huge component of my thought process when I'm evaluating options for a particular client. And people who are, advisors who are focused on just the pure tax benefits alone really miss the forest from the trees on that point, because they can come up with these strategies that look beautiful on paper, but then when you have to actually implement them, they can become a nightmare, right? And so we have so much experience doing that, and I have, my partners, the head of our group has been doing this 50 years, and I have a bunch of colleagues who have been doing this for more than 40 years. I have an incredible bench of people that I can go to and say, with unique situations, and get their perspectives, and we want to not we even if we're building a strategy that's only going to happen or become impactful when the client passes away, you don't want to leave their family members with a mess either, right? And so we'll say, maybe an advisor proposed X, Y, and Z, and we'll say, well, let me explain to you what that's going to look like and what that's going to cost and what that's going to do, and that almost every time shapes the client's thought process on this. And the team part of it is a really big piece. It's I can't do my job without working with people like you, Sam, and your team, because I need the data. I need to really understand the nuts and bolts of the holdings to really be able to figure out how to advise the client. The other aspect is on tax reporting. I had a client recently just make a lot of money, and he's not used to being in this position, and he saw that he has a CPA and he has a tax planner, which I'm his tax planner, and he says, well, wait a minute, don't you guys do the same thing? Like, why do I need both? And I had to explain. I said, no, you can think of us kind of like the architect of the plan. We're going to build the plan, but the CPA is the general contractor. They're the ones that are going to have to implement what we're doing and report what we're doing. And so I need to make sure that they have buy-in as much as the client does in what we're doing, because they're going to have to prepare and sign the returns themselves. And then many times I need the data that they have, the historical tax information that they have, in order to really understand what we're working with, especially if you're dealing with things like partnerships. They have incredibly complicated tax management issues that you have to go through. And so it requires me to operate in a team. If I'm siloed out and I'm cut off from people like you, Sam, or the CPAs, it really takes away a lot of my utility. And I know clients, many times, they want to try to avoid costs because they think, I don't know if they think all the advisors, we're all just going to, talk to each other all day long and things like that. But realistically, I have to tell them it is in your best interest and financial interest to really link us all up together. And the most effective families I work with are ones where there is no barrier between all the advisors, where we operate as a cohesive unit, as if we were a family office and just different departments of it, right? And it's greasing those skids, it's making those connections on your team that, first of all, allows you to delegate the hardest problems in your life to your advisors, but also make sure that it actually gets done well and correctly.
100%. Well, Frank, I think this has been an amazing conversation. Anybody who's charitably minded, I think you're a great resource to connect with them. I know your firm has capabilities to work in many different states. I'll leave the floor with you. What's going on, NGE, Frank? Who are you working with? Are your doors open for new clients? I'll let you wrap us up.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I say this every year, but it's true every year, and it's true now that we are operating at an incredible pace right now. This is the busiest year of my career, and there's no signs of slowing, which is very exciting, because it gives me all the ammunition I need to go to my firm to get even more resources and more people, and that has been proven to be a very successful tactic. We are still taking on business. I like I told you, Sam, I tell other advisors I work with, if you think you have a client that might have an issue, might have a concern on a trust, don't know if their trusts need to be updated, don't know if they have a real issue, I'll talk to anybody for free. I don't need to be engaged to have an initial discussion with somebody, and I can many times diagnose the situation in a few minutes to figure out whether there's a place for us here or with some other advisor. And I'm routinely, referring clients who maybe have a lot of wealth but not a lot of complexity. And I can say, look at, we could certainly work with you, but we could find another firm for you to do it for probably even cheaper, because you don't need all of the bells and whistles. Let's just say that comes with a plan. And for me, it's very important that the people I work with, like you, Sam, trust my judgment. And so I will tell the advisors and the prospective clients the truth. If I look at a plan and I think, even if it's not the way I would have built it, if it meets your needs, I'll say that, and say you don't need to do anything here. And other times, I'll say, oh, we got to watch out for this, and this is something I would fix, and and you'll get that from us. And what's great is I have really good colleagues here, and so when I'm engaged by a client, it's I hope day one they get to meet who will be my co-pilot on all of these, so that these engagements, so that these families get to know my team from day one and feel comfortable in knowing who's really working on their stuff. My clients are on all walks of life. I have a client who started as a truck driver and built a $100 million logistics business. I have clients on the bleeding edge of AI technology, and everything down to McDonald's people, right? So we're really industry agnostic. I've done a tremendous amount of what they call Chapter 14 planning, but it's carried interest planning for private equity funds and similar vehicles.
Vertical slicing. Yeah, I've
been slicing a lot and continue a lot. The SpaceX IPO kept me busy. There were a few of those that we had, some lucky clients that got allotments, and that was a little bit of a hair on fire situation when that all went down. But why I like this job is that every file I pick up has got a different issue, and it keeps things exciting. So I appreciate the diversity and the type of work and client base.
Well, Frank, it's always a pleasure working with you. If anybody's listening to this wants to reach out to Frank, feel free to email me and we can set up some time to connect. I hope everybody found this episode useful. Again, if any of this information provokes any questions, thoughts, comments, feel free to email us. We'll get right back to you, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks for listening to the G360 Wealth Podcast. If today's episode gave you something to think about or act on, share it with someone who might need it. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you're always in the loop. If you want to learn more about how we help families like yours simplify and grow their wealth, visit us at generationcapitaladvisors.com. Until next time, take care and keep building. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Generation Capital Advisors. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Investment advice offered through Integrated Partners, doing business as Generation Capital Advisors, a registered investment advisor. The information in this material is for general information only and is not intended to provide specific advice or recommendation for any individual. Integrated Partners does not provide legal, tax, or mortgage advice or services. Please consult your legal or tax advisor regarding your specific situation. All investing involves risk, including loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss.